Hey guys, what is up? Psychotic here. The release of Final Fantasy VII is drawing closer and closer, so I thought that I wanted to compile some of my best tips and tricks for getting through the remake, which is hopefully gonna be transferable to the final game. So even any game journalist would be able to enjoy this game to the fullest when it arrives. First of all, you're able to run much earlier in the game that you're actually taught. And the way that you sprint run in the game is basically by holding down R1 or pressing down on the Alt3 button and tilting the analog stick in the direction you want to run. Second of all, for all your Soulsborne players out there, you need to learn to defend rather than dodge and dodge roll. There are no iframes in Final Fantasy VII Remake as far as I know, so you are able to get hit mid-roll. What this means is that as soon as you get hit by one attack, you are more than likely to be stun locked, and there is no way out of there until the enemy animation is basically over. Not a good way to mitigate damage, so I would suggest that you rather defend. And the way that you defend is by holding down R1 button when you're in combat. The way to utilize the defend mechanism is basically that as soon as you see the enemy making a certain move, for instance like the missile launcher coming from the Scorpion Sentinel, press R1 and you'll go into the defense stance. Tip number 3 is basically adapting to the situation and the enemies that you're going up against. Like the obvious ones would be use Thunder against machine type enemies and use Barret for ranged attackers that you can't reach with Cloud. A bit more advanced technique is basically using Cloud's different stances that are available to you. So the Shock Troopers, for instance, are pretty evasive against your normal stance with Cloud, but if you go into Punisher mode and let them attack you while you are defending or being in the defense stance mode basically, you will counter attack them and then you can't go in for your bread and butter combo. The game will teach you this, but at a much earlier stage, so if you forgot about the Punisher stance, this is the time to use it. So as mentioned, the game does teach you how to use the operator and Punisher mode, but you basically switch between them by pressing triangle button in combat. Okay, so tip number 4 is a pretty easy and obvious one. It's basically the laser part in the game where you have to traverse through a lot of lasers that flickers on and off. Otherwise you'll get minor to medium damage depending on what difficulty you play on. They do have a cycle, but you just have to be pretty patient about it, because the first couple lasers maybe only be lighting up once and then they close down for a pretty long time. The following lasers flicker on and off a bit quicker, so you're not able to sprint through them in time before you get damage. It's not that big of a deal, but if you want to mitigate as much damage as possible, just wait for it to basically go on standby for a longer time and you can sprint through it easily. The next tip is another more advanced technique as well. The game does teach you this as well, but let's just go over it because this is gonna be pretty useful in the final game as well. So for every enemy encounter, you want to get the enemy pressured and staggered. And what pressure basically is when you use, for instance, elemental weaknesses to an enemy, for instance, again Thunder against machines, will tend to get pressured easier. So when the enemy is pressured, you're gonna be able to build up the staggering meter quicker, and as long as the enemy is pressured, it's also going to be unable to do any real actions. So basically what pressure is what staggering is for damage. But as soon as you get the enemy into staggering mode, you're basically going to be dealing a lot more damage. So you want to save off, for instance, limit breaks and your more special abilities to deal max damage against your enemies. So the final tip and advice I can give you is that this game is not X to win or press X to win. For instance, the Scorpion Sentinel boss of the FF7 Remake demo is made up of several phases, and you will have to adapt to each state accordingly to be able to mitigate as much damage as you can and save as many resources as possible. What you have to remember is that in the final game, it doesn't end here. You need those potions for later, you need those ethers for later, you need those phoenix downs for later. This game is not a stroll in the park, especially not on normal mode. It might not be the most difficult game either, but I think it's suitably challenging. For instance, having played the original Final Fantasy a lot, I never used a potion in the later runs. In the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo, especially my first run, I almost used up all of my potions, and that was with looting everything that I could find. This is basically one tip, but I'm gonna summarize the 3 different phases that the Scorpion is gonna go through and what you can do accordingly to get out on the other side victorious. So the first phase of the Scorpion Sentinel boss fight is pretty straightforward. I would try and use overcharge as soon as possible with Barret, so you can get your ATB gauge up as fast as possible, so you can launch a thunder attack against the Scorpion. With Cloud, I would probably use either fire or just like bread and butter combos until you can get your ATB gauge up as well, and just basically get the Scorpion Sentinel into pressure mode as fast as possible. When the Scorpion Sentinel has taken sufficient enough damage, it's gonna go into stage 2, which basically consists of it raising a shield. What you're gonna notice is when you're close to the Scorpion, it's gonna have a field generator, and to hit the field generator you need to get behind the Scorpion Sentinel and hit it either with thunder or bread and butter attacks again, or maybe even do focus thrust or braver when you have your ATB gauge up with Cloud. Again, you can use overcharge to get that ATB gauge filled with Barret as well. Just during the entire fight, be aware of your health at all times. If you're gonna go melee attack with Cloud behind the Scorpion Sentinel, just be aware of its different attacks. If it's gonna tail whip you, use defend, and basically if it's gonna use 99 mark launcher, use defend as well. There is not always a clear telegraphing to the moves that the Scorpion Sentinel makes, but the way that you identify which move it's gonna make and when it's gonna make it is by looking above its name tag and health bar. And it's gonna say whether it's gonna use the tail swipe or 99 mark launcher. Just be sure to react accordingly and in time, and remember to use defend more than your dodge roll. So let's actually call the initial phase for phase 0, because I consider the tail laser phase for its second phase. It's not really that different from the first phase. The only thing that's changing is that during the fight it's now gonna like drop down debris from wherever, and you're gonna have to run behind the debris so as not to be hit by its tail laser. Now what is important is that as soon as it's done doing the tail laser animation, you just go and do your thing. Just keep on damaging it the same way you've done up until this point. Also be aware that if you need the extra defense, you can always use Steel Skin when your ATB gauge is full with Barret, and of course also use his big shot, I believe is what it was called in the original. So close to dying, the Scorpion Sentinel is gonna go into its third phase, and it's gonna go completely bonkers. Like, it's shooting everywhere and very chaotic. It also gets an auto repair unit, as Cloud is gonna state. You know what, that's actually pretty accurate. Let's just call it phase bonkers, because it's gonna go completely bonkers. The most important part of this phase is that you don't necessarily like target the Scorpion itself, but actually its legs, because that's gonna get it into a stagger or pressured mode, which in turn is, as we've already learned, gonna make you do a lot more damage. So break that leg and be victorious. So those were my tips and tricks to defeating the Scorpion Sentinel and the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo. I hope that you might have learned something, even though a lot of these tips and advices are actually being taught in the game itself, but maybe you get a more practical insight in how you utilize the different tools that you get in the game. I personally look forward to this game a lot, and it's definitely gonna be one of my Game of the Year contenders on my personal list anyway. That and Cyberpunk 2077, so it's not like there's a lot of competition anyway. But yeah, we've been waiting for this a lot, and it's gonna be great. I'm pretty hopeful. So yeah, if you like the video, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more of this kind of content and you don't want to miss anything. And I'll see you guys next time. Sigh out.